It started with a letter, a single yellowed envelope addressed to my grandmother. Inside was the deed to a crumbling prison and a cryptic note. "It's yours now." What could a sweet elderly woman possibly inherit from a place like that? Trust me, the answer is more horrifying than you could ever imagine. This isn't your average story about family heirlooms or forgotten inheritances. My grandmother, a woman who never so much as jaywalked, suddenly became the owner of an abandoned prison with a dark and twisted past. What was meant to be a quick trip to settle legalities turned into something no one in my family was prepared for. And now, I need to tell you what really happened in that place. It all began on a quiet Sunday afternoon. My grandmother, who everyone called Nana, was the type of woman who baked cookies for the neighbors and never raised her voice. She'd lived in our small town her entire life, so when a letter arrived from a law office in another state, it was a shock. The letter claimed she was the sole heir to a property, a decommissioned prison known as Black Hollow Penitentiary. Nana had no idea why. She didn't recognize the name of the lawyer or the prison. At first, we all laughed it off as some sort of scam. But the letter came with official documents, including an old faded photograph of the prison with the words "Property of the Graves family" scrawled on the back. We tried to convince Nana not to go. After all, what could she possibly want with a prison? But she was stubborn. She insisted on traveling to the property to sort it all out. So I offered to go with her, thinking it would be a quick trip, just some paperwork and maybe a short look at the place. I couldn't have been more wrong. The drive to Black Hollow was eerie from the start. The closer we got, the fewer cars we saw. Eventually, the roads became unpaved, and the trees seemed to close in around us. When the prison came into view, it was like something out of a nightmare. Massive stone walls towered over the landscape, vines crawling up every surface. The front gate hung open as if inviting us inside. Nana was unusually quiet. She just stared at the building with an expression I couldn't place, half curiosity, half dread. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, even though it was the middle of summer. Dust coated every surface, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. The warden's office was surprisingly intact, with a desk still piled with old papers and a typewriter sitting in the center. That's where we found it, the journal. It was bound in cracked leather, and the pages were brittle with age. The first entry was dated 1923 and written by a man named Jeremiah Graves. Nana's maiden name was Graves. Suddenly, this wasn't just a strange inheritance, it was personal. The journal detailed the prison's history, but it wasn't the kind of history you'd find in textbooks. Black Hollow wasn't just a place for criminals. It was a place for the forgotten. People who didn't fit into society were sent there, and the journal hinted at experiments, strange rituals, whispered accounts of prisoners disappearing without a trace. The further we read, the darker the entries became. Jeremiah wrote about a presence in the prison, something he called the Watcher. He claimed it fed off fear and despair, growing stronger with every life it consumed. Nana's hands trembled as she read aloud. She recognized some of the names in the journal, distant relatives she'd only heard about in passing. It became clear that the prison wasn't just an inheritance. It was a curse passed down through generations. That night, we decided to stay in a small motel nearby and return to the prison in the morning. But sleep didn't come easily. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of whispers. At first, I thought it was coming from the room next door, but when I sat up, I realized the sound was inside our room. Nana was awake too, clutching the journal to her chest. She whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded, too afraid to speak. The whispers grew louder, forming words we couldn't understand, and then the lights flickered. It felt like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. A shadow moved across the wall, but there was no one else in the room. Nana began reciting a prayer, her voice shaking. The shadow seemed to react, twisting and stretching toward her. Suddenly, the journal burst into flames in her hands. She screamed and dropped it, but the fire disappeared the moment it hit the floor. The journal was untouched, but the air smelled like smoke. Nana looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "We have to end this." The next morning, we went back to the prison, determined to destroy the journal and whatever ties our family had to that place. We found an old furnace in the basement and threw the journal inside. As the flames consumed it, the walls of the prison seemed to groan, like the building itself was alive. But then we heard it, a deep, guttural growl that echoed through the halls. The watcher wasn't gone. If anything, it was angry. We ran out of the prison and never looked back. Nana passed away a few months later, but she made me promise one thing, to never let anyone go back to Black Hollow. She believed destroying the journal had weakened the curse but not erased it. Sometimes I dream about that place. I see the shadow, hear the whispers. I've thought about going back, but deep down I know it's better to leave it alone. Whatever's in that prison, it's still there. And it's still watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying stories like this one.